Why did every civilization invent gods, monsters, and sacred masks before they ever met one another? Across oceans and millennia, the same symbols returned. To understand why, we must descend into the oldest architecture of the human mind. When Thomas Mann pondered the fathomless origins of human civilization at the opening of his mythologically conceived tetralogy, he famously observed that the well of the past is extraordinarily deep, if not altogether bottomless. As comparative mythology compels us to scrutinize the spiritual chronicle of our species, we discover that beneath the fleeting surface of contemporary secular existence rests an immemorial subterranean labyrinth whose foundations extend backward through the millenniums of primitive hunting bands, past the silent grottos of Pleistocene carnivores, and into the dark biological abysses of nature itself. Across every human culture that has ever been recorded by history or unburied by archaeology, mankind has consistently refused to ground its collective life upon mere empirical facts, choosing instead to structure its societies, liturgies, and moral imperatives around the blazing visionary motifs of a shared mythological imagination. Whether we examine the fire theft, the cosmic deluge, the virgin birth, or the resurrected hero, we find a remarkably finite fund of archetypal themes appearing globally in endlessly altered permutations, serving everywhere as the energy-releasing and direction-giving agents of human destiny. To comprehend how these unsubstantial imaginary constructs possess the terrifying power to galvanize whole populations and erect enduring civilizations, we must first adopt the slanted eye of the artist and enter what Johann Huizinga termed the sacred play-sphere of asterisk as if asterisk. In the secular domain of daily utilitarian logic, the mind rigidly insists upon Aristotelian differentiation, asserting that it can never simultaneously be B, yet the moment a participant steps across the threshold of a sanctuary or dons a ceremonial mask, a fundamental psychological shift supervenes wherein normal secular logic dissolves into a state of mystical indissociation. When an initiate beholds a masked dancer in a primitive festival, everyone present understands with objective literalness that the mask was carved from wood by a human craftsman and is currently worn by a known member of the tribe. Yet within the rapturous logic of the ritual play-sphere, that literal knowledge is willingly set aside so that the mask is experienced as a veritable apparition of the living God. This primary psychological mechanism, whereby the individual voluntarily acquiesces in a game of make-believe until the play state ascends from jest into genuine seizure, is the foundational datum of mythological science, transubstantiating the opaque weight of earthly existence and freeing the human spirit through the magical alchemy of ritual play. Long before human culture began impressing its social dogmas upon the malleable mind of the child, the biological architecture of the central nervous system had already been structured by millions of years of evolutionary adaptation to the natural environment. Modern ethology demonstrates that when newly hatched sea turtles emerge from their sandy nests, or when barnyard chicks with eggshells still adhering to their tails instantly scatter for cover at the overhead shadow of a wooden hawk model, these creatures are not executing trial-and-error learning, but are rather responding to inherited neurological structures termed innate releasing mechanisms. These inherited neural locks, or biological isomorphs, sleep within the central nervous system until they are abruptly triggered by specific environmental releases known as sign stimuli, revealing that the responding subject is not merely the fragile individual, but a transindividual biological continuum carrying the ancient memory deposits of the species. When Carl Jung formulated his seminal theory of the collective unconscious and its universal archetypes, he identified psychic counterparts to these biological releasing mechanisms, recognizing that primary mythological motifs are the psychic expressions of anatomically and physiologically determined natural tendencies inherited across generations. Furthermore, biological research reveals the extraordinary phenomenon of the supernormal sign stimulus, wherein an artificially heightened or exaggerated model evokes a far more intense instinctual response from the organism than any naturally occurring object in the wild. Through the invention of ritual art, cosmetics, hieratic masks, and sacred architecture, the human species has systematically constructed an artificial environment composed of supernormal sign stimuli, designed specifically to strike the deepest chords of our inherited nervous structure and release latent stores of psychic energy. As the poet A. E. Housman famously noted, "True poetic and mythological images do not function as intellectual references designed for logical cognition, but act rather as physical catalysts that provoke immediate physiological symptoms, shivers down the spine, constriction of the throat, and visceral impacts in the pit of the stomach, thereby communicating immediate, unmediated experiences of transcendent reality." While certain innate biological structures provide the universal foundation of human experience, the protracted 12-year period of infantile helplessness subjects the developing human psyche to a series of inescapable emotional imprints that permanently shape the motifs of world mythology. The initial indelible shock of the birth trauma, characterized by circulatory congestion, blood suffocation, and a sudden terrifying expulsion from paradise into the cold assault of temporal existence, establishes the universal prototype for all subsequent threshold passages and rites of rebirth throughout early infancy. As the child experiences the actionless bliss of symbiosis at the mother's breast, interspersed with terrifying moments of maternal absence and bodily frustration, the mother image inevitably bifurcates into a profound dual archetype. She is experienced simultaneously as the inexhaustible, nourishing Madonna of Paradise and as the terrifying, cannibalistic ogress, personified in world mythology by the Hindu goddess Kali or the devouring mouth of hell, who sends forth living beings from her cosmic womb only to tear them apart and consume them back into her dark abyss. Linked intimately to this fear of reabsorption by the Dark Mother is the archetype of the subterranean spiral labyrinth, which appears spontaneously in childhood dreams, deep meditative trances, and the entrance stones of ancient megalithic burial mounds. From the Paleolithic sanctuaries of southern France to the mortuary rituals of the New Hebrides, entry into the winding turns of the labyrinth has represented both the perilous plunge of daylight consciousness into the dark abyss of non-being and the necessary subterranean journey toward the water of life. By constructing tombs that meticulously duplicated the internal anatomy of the mother, ancient mankind sought to ensure that the traumatic dissolution of death would be transmuted into a second gestation, allowing the soul to navigate the dangerous, mazy defenses of the underworld and emerge reborn into the eternal light of the spirit. When we transition from the hunting domains to the tropical agricultural province of the primitive planters, we encounter a fundamental revolution in human mythological consciousness, grounded entirely in the profound analogies of the vegetable world. In these equatorial societies, the central mythic paradigm is no longer the individual vision quest of the solitary hunter, but rather the primal, terrifying mythological event wherein a divine maiden deity, the Dema, is brutally murdered and dismembered and buried by the ancestral community, as illustrated in the West Ceramese myth of the maiden Hanuel, whose miraculous body excreted precious ornaments before she was pressed into a dance pit and buried alive by the dancing spiral of the 9 families. It is precisely from the buried fragments of the slain goddess that the staple food plants of mankind, such as yams, taro, and coconut, spring forth for the first time. This harrowing revelation of the slain Dema deity discloses a terrifying, synthesizing insight that lies at the very heart of agricultural existence, namely, that temporal life on earth is sustained exclusively through the continuous administration of death and slaughter. In this equatorial worldview, reproduction and death are recognized as the 2 inseparable, complementary aspects of a single temporal continuum, wherein innocence is permanently shattered and the continuation of the species demands the daily sacrificial killing of living beings. Far from regarding this primal murder as a mere criminal act or a moral fall, the planter societies elevated the ritual love-death into their supreme, life-renewing sacrament, periodically reenacting the original divine immolation through animal and human sacrifices, so that the entire community might align its consciousness with the monstrous, God-willed order of the universe. In stark contrast to the regimented, group-oriented priesthoods of the agricultural planters, the hunting mythologies of the Paleolithic Ice Age revolved entirely around the solitary, ecstatic genius of the shaman. The shamanic vocation is typically initiated not by social appointment, but through an overwhelming, spontaneous psychological crisis, a profound mental rupture characterized by terrifying visions of being shot, dismembered, cooked, and devoured by ancestral spirits who count the candidate's bones and reconstruct them with adamantine substances. Having successfully traversed this harrowing ordeal of spiritual death and resurrection, the shaman achieves the capacity to throw themselves into controlled ecstatic trances at will. Mounting the cosmic world tree or riding the rhythmic vibrations of the sacred drum, to fly as a bird beyond the bounds of temporal reality into the supernatural realms of the spirits. Deep within the absolute cosmic darkness of the Ice Age caves, such as Lascaux, Altamira, and the subterranean labyrinth of Trois Freres, we behold the sacred sanctuaries where these Paleolithic artist-wizards conducted their mysterious hunting magic. High upon a craggy rock, apse in the sanctuary of Trois Freres, presiding majestically over hundreds of engraved bison, reindeer, and mammoths, stands the famous sorcerer, a towering, black-painted figure endowed with the antlered head of a stag, the eyes of an owl, the beard of a man, the paws of a bear, and the tail of a feline. This striking apparition represents the supreme lord and master of the animals, the supernatural archetype of the species who guarantees that when game beasts are slaughtered in the hunt, their death is merely a temporary, willing sacrifice, provided the hunters scrupulously execute the sacred rituals of the returned blood and cover the remains with reverence. The inner life essence of the slain animal is safely restored to its eternal source, ensuring that the herds will return in endless abundance to sustain the human tribe. As the Neolithic peasant villages of riverine Mesopotamia expanded into flourishing market towns during the 4th millennium before Christ, An unprecedented revolution in human consciousness precipitated the birth of the world's earliest high civilizations. Around 3200 BC, in the Sumerian mud cities of Ur, Kish and Erech, initiated temple priests, made the momentous discovery that in addition to the sun and moon, 5 visible planetary spheres moved in mathematically established, law-abiding courses along the zodiacal highway of the fixed stars. Out of this awe-inspiring astronomical realization sprang the bold, playful yet terrifying concept of the hieratic city-state as a mesocosm asterisk, an earthly middle cosmos designed by priestcraft to function as a precise, living imitation of the macrocosmic order of the heavens. The entire city-state was organized as an architecture of cosmic consonance. The walled perimeter was quartered according to the 4 cardinal directions. The ziggurat rose at the central axis as the pivotal world mountain linking heaven and earth, and the calendar, mathematics, and liturgical music were rigorously structured to echo the harmonious music of the celestial spheres. The most harrowing yet magnificent manifestation of this celestial mesocosm is revealed in the royal tombs of Ur, where Sir Leonard Woolley unearthed the stone death pits of ancient Sumerian monarchs who were interred along with their entire royal courts. In these vast subterranean chambers, rows of court ladies wearing golden leaf diadems, lapis lazuli necklaces, and crimson cloaks lay peacefully side by side with soldiers, grooms, silver chariots, and golden bull-headed harps, having willingly swallowed a narcotic draught to accompany their incarnate god-king across the threshold of death. In this sublime, uncompromising game of cosmic destiny, the individual was no longer regarded as an isolated temporal entity, but rather as an epiphany of an eternal archetype participating in the deathless round dance of the cosmos through the mediation of the mesocosmic city-state. The microcosm of the human individual was brought into absolute harmony with the macrocosm of the universe, demonstrating that beneath the changing masks of local mythology, human civilization itself is a grand, living poem designed to bring the fleeting life of man on Earth into concord with the eternal rhythms of the stars.